Imagine walking into like a massive modern skyscraper. You're heading up to a really crucial meeting, so you stride through this pristine, echoey glass lobby. You step into the elevator, and you press the button for the top floor.
Right, and you have a very fundamental expectation of how that mechanism works.
Exactly. You expect a perfectly linear, predictable ride, straight up, point A to point B.
Because that linear progression is really the core assumption of modern life. I mean, we expect effort in, results out, a straight, safe line.
But imagine that the moment those elevator doors slide shut, you realize the wiring of this elevator isn't just connected to the pulley system. It's mysteriously wired to, like, the building's thermostat, the daily fluctuations of the stock market, and your own repressed childhood memories.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So when you press the button for the top floor, the architecture just expands in all directions simultaneously. You're pulled up, sure, but simultaneously you are dragged down into the basement.
That sounds completely disorienting.
It is. You're yanked violently east into a blinding light, pulled west into total darkness, and, just to make it completely chaotic, you're thrust backward in time.
Which would be terrifying. I mean, you would have zero sense of orientation, and every input will seemingly have, well, nothing to do with where you actually want it to go.
It would feel like absolute chaos. But according to the stack of materials we have for you today, that chaotic, multidimensional, nonlinear elevator ride, that is the true architecture of the human mind. The psyche is not, and frankly never has been, a straight line.
No, it's a radically different geometry than what we are taught in school or in the corporate world, for that matter.
Welcome to this deep dive. Today our mission is to unpack a truly incredible and honestly sometimes controversial collection of sources for you.
Yeah, it's a very diverse stack.
It really is. We're synthesizing historical documents detailing the ancient evolution of drama, some fascinating academic research on modern neurobiology out of UCLA, and comprehensive audio lectures.
And the goal here is to uncover how ancient concepts of space and balance dictate not just human storytelling, but the fundamental architecture of your mental health and your everyday reality.
Right. But before we really dig into that multidimensional elevator, we do need to offer a quick disclaimer for you listening.
Yes, very important. The sources we're working from today contain some highly charged historical and religious critiques. Specifically, they dive deep into the psychological impacts of patriarchal religions, the biblical creation story, and Western colonialism.
They are definitely provocative arguments.
Very provocative. But our goal here is not to take sides or to endorse these specific historical viewpoints. We're simply and impartially unpacking the arguments so we can understand the underlying psychological mechanisms that these texts are highlighting.
Right. We're just looking at the blueprint they draw, purely to understand the human mind.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this. To understand why your modern life so often feels like that chaotic elevator ride, we have to map the psychological space you're actually standing in. And the sources start by totally dismantling the straight line, going all the way back to Aristotle.
Right. Aristotle argued that human drama wasn't just, weekend entertainment. It was a mechanism for human elevation.
And the shape of that drama, and therefore the mind, wasn't a line, it was a sphere.
Or a mandala. And to give you the exact blueprint the texts use, let's look at how they draw from Native American cultures, specifically this psychological framework of the medicine wheel.
Which maps directly to that multidimensional pull we described in the elevator.
Exactly. It maps the human psyche into 4 distinct, competing directional forces.
We'll walk through those forces, because I think they really represent the daily tug-of-war we all feel.
Yeah. Let's start with the north. So on the wheel, the north is represented by the color white, and it governs the mental aspect. This is the realm of cold logic, reason, analysis, adulthood. Now, directly pulling against that, down in the south, which is represented by the color red, you have the physical and emotional realm.
So this is what, like raw intuition?
Raw intuition, innocence, earthliness, and vulnerability, yes.
So it's basically the classic battle, the cold logic of the brain pulling against the raw emotion of the heart.
That's the vertical axis, right? And then you have the horizontal pole. To the east, the yellow direction, you have the energy of the rising sun, which this represents spirituality, enlightenment, new beginnings, looking outward. And pulling against that, to the west, the black direction, you have the physical body, restlessness, the setting sun, introspection, and darkness.
Okay, wait, let me challenge this model for a second.
Go for it.
If you, the listener, are the person standing inside this psychological wheel,
Right.
And you're being pulled by that north logic telling you to, I don't know, be a responsible adult, answer your emails, pay your taxes. But you're simultaneously being pulled by that south emotion that just wants to throw your laptop out the window and scream into a pillow from burnout. You're just a pinball.
A pinball.
Yeah, is the human experience just bouncing helplessly between these massive opposing forces?
Well, it might feel that way on a Tuesday afternoon, but the whole point of this ancient blueprint is that competing forces don't inherently create chaos.
They don't.
No. Think about how Sun Tzu viewed conflict in The Art of War. He observed that dynamic balance naturally corrects excesses. I mean, day naturally follows night. Economic booms lead to busts.
Oh, sure. Total ignorance eventually creates enough pain that it forces a search for knowledge.
Exactly. So the tension is actually what holds the structure together.
Like the cables on a suspension bridge.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. The goal of the human psyche and the goal of all great drama isn't to violently bounce between the edges of the wheel, letting the cables snap you back and forth.
So where are we trying to go?
The goal is to reach the center. On the medicine wheel, the center is green. It's a space of learning, of harmony, and true self. The texts actually refer to this state using the concept of the Charka-vyuha.
Charka-vyuha.
Yeah, it's essentially a power field or a strategic arrangement to secure victory. It's an active, powerful state of balance where you can harness the North's logic and the South's emotion simultaneously without being controlled by either.
I mean, I get that the ancients had this beautiful medicine wheel concept, but I have a hard time buying that they were perfectly balanced while modern humanity is just completely broken.
That's a fair point.
Right. Ancient tribal cultures had war, famine, and brutality. It wasn't some peaceful utopia. So what actually changed? If we both have the exact same human brain, why does modern humanity feel so hopelessly anxious and fragmented?
Well, the human brain hasn't changed, but the external map we rely on has been destroyed. To understand this shift, the texts lean heavily on the work of anthropologist Mircea Eliade.
Oh, right. His concept of the axis mundi?
Yes, the vertical center of the world, the pillar that links heaven, earth, and the underworld.
How does that relate to our everyday anxiety, though?
Because for ancient humanity, space wasn't just empty and neutral like it is for us today. There was sacred space and profane space. When ancient people built a village, they didn't just throw up tents randomly based on, property value.
Right. They built an imago mundi, a physical representation of the cosmos.
Exactly. They literally built their psychology into the architecture of their towns. They built it from the center outward.
So the center was the axis mundi.
Yes, maybe a temple, a totem, or a central fire. And inside the village walls, radiating from that center, there was order, law, and harmony. It was sacred space.
And outside.
All the chaos, the
Yeah.
literal predators, the metaphorical dragons, the demons, the unknown other. That was all left safely outside the walls in the profane space. You knew exactly where you stood in the universe. Inside was safe, outside was chaos.
But then the sources point to a massive catastrophic turning point in human history that essentially bulldozed that entire concept.
World War I.
Yeah, it was the ultimate psychological earthquake.
It really was. The texts describe WWI as total war, and they argue it completely shattered the biblical idea of evil for the modern mind.
Because suddenly the monsters weren't lurking outside the village walls anymore.
No, they weren't in some distant foreign land. The mechanized, industrialized slaughter of millions of people, the mustard gas, the trench warfare, it was happening right in the absolute heart of the so-called civilized world.
Right, the most north-oriented, logical societies use their logic to build slaughter machines.
The realization was devastating. The monsters were us. The chaos wasn't out there anymore. It was inside the gates.
It's as if humanity was navigating a dark forest, and someone suddenly blew up the North Star. The external center was just gone.
And you see how this trauma bled instantly into our culture.
Absolutely. The texts show it in the art of the time. There was this sudden explosion of dadaism, cubism, and surrealism.
Art became fractured.
Yeah, abstract and absurd. Because humanity felt that it had fallen entirely into a neutral, meaningless, profane space. There was no sacred center left to paint, so they just painted the fragments.
And when the external village square burned down, humanity had no choice but to look inward. I mean, this is the exact moment in history when depth psychology, figures like Freud and Jung, step onto the stage.
We desperately searched inside our own minds for a new axis mundi, a new center to anchor ourselves.
But the profound tragedy the sources highlight is that when we finally looked inward to find our internal compass, we realized the compass was already smashed to pieces.
It's completely dysfunctional. And the sources lean on the psychoanalyst Robert L. Moore here to explain how this dysfunction actually manifests.
Right, Moore mapped out the fundamental archetypes of the male psyche: the king, the warrior, the magician, and the lover.
But because we had lost our connection to a true sacred center, these archetypes couldn't function healthily.
No, they became corrupted into what Jungians call their shadows.
Let's connect this grand historical shift directly to the listener's daily life. Because we aren't just talking about mythical kings on thrones here. We're talking about why, say, a modern middle manager overseeing a team of 5 people suddenly becomes a tyrannical micromanager.
Well, that micromanager is the textbook example of a corrupted king archetype. Think about the mechanism here. A healthy king archetype draws its authority and calm from being rooted in that green center of the medicine wheel.
Right.
But when a society loses its central moral compass, individuals no longer have a blueprint for what a good leader looks like. Without that center to anchor them, the king archetype panics.
It feels the chaos.
Exactly. And to compensate, it becomes a tyrant, obsessed with dominating and controlling every tiny detail just to feel safe.
Or the warrior loses his noble cause and becomes a ruthless corporate mercenary.
Mm.
Or the lover archetype corrupts into someone who is hopelessly addicted or possessively jealous.
Exactly. They all distort.
But this begs a massive question. Why were the internal shadows already waiting for us? What broke our internal compass before the world wars even started?
This is where the texts present their most provocative historical critique, and it requires us to look at theology.
And again, impartially reporting the sources here.
Yes, strictly impartially. They trace the root cause back centuries to the rise of patriarchal religions and the shift in how we viewed nature.
Thou so.
They argue that in ancient times, the earth was universally revered as a goddess. Nature itself was inherently sacred and divine.
Right.
But with the dominance of the Genesis narrative, the theological framing of Eve as the original sinner, the earth being explicitly cursed by God, the snake representing absolute evil rather than earthly wisdom, the paradigm violently shifted.
The divine was removed from the dirt. Nature was stripped of its sacredness.
It became purely mechanistic. Nature was no longer a living, sacred partner to coexist with. It was simply dead, profane matter.
And if it's dead matter, the logical North conclusion is that it is meant to be dominated, exploited, and controlled for human gain.
Yes. But the psychological tragic flaw here, the mechanism that actually broke us, is that this obsessive, culturally ingrained need to dominate nature didn't stay outside of us.
It turned inward. We started treating our own internal nature, our intuition, our wildness, our messy emotions, like it was a forest to be paved over and turned into a parking lot.
We began to repress and fear our own natural instincts. We viewed our South emotions as sinful, irrational, or weak compared to the cold, industrial logic of the North. We literally tried to dominate ourselves.
But anyone who has ever tried to just logically pave over a feeling of deep grief or intense anger knows it doesn't work.
No, the feelings don't just disappear into the concrete.
The texts quote the poet William Blake here, which I think perfectly captures the danger of this. He wrote, "The beginning of ego is in vagueness."
Let's really unpack the mechanics of that quote. When you successfully suppress your natural, sharp emotions, they don't vanish. They just lose their clarity. They morph into vague, floating, ambient anxieties.
And vague emotions are inherently egocentric.
Precisely.
Think about road rage. When someone cuts you off in traffic, you don't feel a clear, harmonious, logical emotion because you're disconnected from the center. You feel a vague, overwhelmingly selfish reaction. Like, how dare they do this to M? Don't they know who I am?
The texts argue that this vagueness infects everything. We even treat the concept of love this way.
Wow, really?
Yeah. Instead of love being a clear, unifying force from the center, we experience it as a vague, egocentric desire to possess and dominate another person, just like we try to possess nature.
So we find ourselves stuck in this fragmented, profane space, reacting to modern life with shadow archetypes, road rage, and vague anxieties. And since we obviously cannot time travel back to a tribal campfire to rebuild an ancient village, where does the modern cure come from?
Well, according to the synthesis in our sources, it comes from 2 incredibly unexpected places: the neurobiology labs at UCLA and the movie theaters of Hollywood.
Okay, let's start with the hard science. We have the work of Dr. Dan Siegel, a prominent clinical psychiatrist from UCLA.
Right.
He defines the human mind mathematically, calling it an open, chaotic, nonlinear system.
And that word nonlinear is really the key to understanding our daily misery.
How so?
In a linear system, the output matches the input. But in a nonlinear system, a microscopic trigger can cause a massive system-wide collapse.
Oh, it's the butterfly effect in your brain. It
Exactly.
means getting a slightly passive-aggressive, badly worded text message from your boss at 8 a.m. doesn't just make you slightly annoyed, it cascades.
Yep.
You snap at your partner over breakfast, you ruin your focus for the entire afternoon, you stress eat at midnight. The whole system crashes from one tiny input.
And to prevent that catastrophic collapse, Dr. Siegel says the mind requires what he calls optimal self-organization. And through modern clinical observation, he defines a healthy, self-organized mind as possessing 5 specific traits.
What are they?
It must be flexible, meaning it can bend under pressure without snapping. It must be adaptive, able to adjust to new unexpected environments. It must be coherent, able to hold a logical narrative together. It must be energized, possessing the vitality to actually take action. And finally, it must be stable, remaining grounded when the winds of chaos blow.
And when you read those 5 traits in the context of the historical text we just discussed, it is a massive aha
That
moment.
really connects everything, because if you map Dr. Siegel's 5 modern psychiatric traits of a healthy mind, they perfectly align with the Native American medicine wheel.
It's wild. The flexibility and adaptability map perfectly to the emotional flowing south and the spiritual east.
Exactly. And the coherence and stability map perfectly to the logical north and the grounded west.
And the energized state.
That is the green center.
So modern empirical neurobiology and ancient indigenous wisdom are looking at the exact same blueprint of the human psyche, just using different vocabulary.
Which is incredibly validating. But it raises the ultimate question: how do we actually use this blueprint?
Right. What does this mean for you, the listener? Because knowing the math of your brain matches an ancient wheel is intellectually cool, but knowing the math isn't enough to heal you.
No, humans are not smartphones. You can't just download the flexible and adaptive software patch overnight.
Exactly. To actually experience a psychological shift, human beings require ritual. We need a visceral emotional practice to help us find that center.
And because the traditional village axis mundi is gone, we don't have a sacred fire in the middle of our suburbs, the sources argue that the movie theater has become our new collective sacred space.
Hollywood is supplying the modern ritual of the Axis Mundi.
Yes. But not just any movie acts as a healing ritual. Watching a perfectly happy person have a perfectly fine day is not drama. The texts explicitly state life and drama exist only through holes.
Meaning the hero must have a flaw, a crack in their psyche.
Without that crack, the ritual fails. The hero's journey on the silver screen acts as a modern shamanistic trip for the audience sitting in the dark theater. We essentially project our own broken compass onto the hero.
Oh man, The Matrix is the perfect modern manifestation of this.
It really is.
You look at the character of Neo at the very start of that film. He is existing in the ultimate profane space, a gray, meaningless office cubicle. He's a victim of a hyperlogical, machine-dominated North society.
But Neo has a crack.
Right, he has this nagging, painful psychological flaw of vague anxiety telling him the world isn't right.
And how does Neo ultimately resolve that anxiety? How does he win? It's not just by learning to punch harder or shoot faster.
Right.
By the climax of the film, when Neo is standing on that rooftop dodging bullets in slow motion, we aren't just watching a cool action sequence. We are watching a literal visual manifestation of Dr. Siegel's optimally self-organized mind.
Wow, so the bullets flying at him are the chaotic, non-linear disruptions of life. They are the bad text messages, the micromanaging bosses, the road rage, the historical trauma.
Exactly. And Neo faces those chaotic inputs by becoming perfectly flexible, adaptive, coherent, energized, and stable. He literally bends backward to adapt to the chaos without breaking his stability.
He finds the green center of the medicine wheel.
He does. But the mechanism for reaching that center is crucial. The sources emphasize that the hero must make a sacrifice to get there.
And in this psychological framework, sacrifice doesn't mean becoming a physical martyr and dying.
No, it means sacrificing the ego. Sacrificing the sweet, intoxicating feeling of victimhood.
Oh, like when someone cuts you off in traffic, your ego loves being the victim.
It revels in the righteous anger. It wants to stay in the vagueness of road rage. To reach the center, you have to sacrifice that incredibly tempting reaction.
You get to drop the pinball flippers.
Yes. You stop fighting the pull of the North's logic and the South's emotion, and you consciously step into the middle. Neo surpasses his individual frightened ego, and by doing so, he shifts from mere time into timelessness. He achieves universal harmony.
That is an incredible journey to process. We've navigated all the way from Aristotle's spherical concept of drama and the ancient Native American medicine wheel through the world-shattering trauma of World War I that destroyed our sacred spaces, explored the rise of our corrupted shadow archetypes, and landed squarely at the intersection of UCLA psychiatry and Hollywood's shamanic ritual.
It proves that the fundamental architecture of our minds hasn't changed an inch, even if the glass skyscrapers we live in have replaced the ancient village walls.
And the takeaway for you listening is deeply practical. Finding your own internal center requires you to sacrifice your conditioned, ego-driven reactions. It requires you to stop slamming the flippers when life's nonlinear chaos bumps you. Instead of trying to pave over your emotions, you have to let the light shine through your own psychological cracks.
But, if we connect this profound idea of the crack to the bigger picture of how we live today, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over.
Okay.
If reaching that ultimate sacred center, if achieving true, resilient psychological harmony absolutely requires a crack or a flaw for the light to get in, what does this mean for our modern culture of endless self-optimization?
Oh, that's interesting.
We spend our billions of dollars on productivity apps, biological hacks, and endless therapies, all trying to seamlessly eradicate every single one of our flaws and perfectly smooth out our lives. But by trying to engineer away our cracks, are we accidentally sealing off the only remaining gateway we have to the sacred center?
Wow. We are literally out here buying expensive spackle for the very cracks that let the light in. That entirely shifts how you look at the pursuit of perfection. Thank you for joining us as the third person in this fascinating conversation today. We hope this deep dive gives you a completely new perspective the next time you step into an elevator or sit down in a dark movie theater. Stay curious, and we will see you on the next deep dive.